Where's my cross? Where's my cross? Asked the 12-year-old. After walking for 497 miles with very little food and very little water, you would expect a 12-year-old boy to ask, where's lunch? Or how soon can we take a nap? Or why did you bring us all this way? But instead, the 12-year-old boy asked the question with all sincerity, where's my cross? He asked the question on February 5th, 1597, on a hilltop overlooking Nagasaki, Japan. The great Hideyoshi, the reigning samurai of that day, had unified, if you can believe it, the 6,000 islands of Japan. And in so doing, he issued an edict that all foreign Christian priests would be expelled from the country, wherever they were found. And his samurai warriors went out looking to see if any were left, and sure enough, they found some priests and some underground churches, and they gathered them up for justice. There were 6 priests, 2 from Portugal, 2 from Spain, and 2 from Mexico. And there were 19 adult converts who were worshiping with them, and 1 tag-along 12-year-old boy who was, well, part of one of the families. They rounded the Christians up both in Kyoto and Osaka, and they marched them across the country until they came to Nagasaki, which was the place of where most of the house churches were to be found. Most Christians were found in Nagasaki. And Hideyoshi was going to make a strong statement to all the Christians there, because he was going to crucify all of them atop that hill so they could be seen. But when they arrived at the hilltop, the boy already knew his math, and he did his count. And he realized that there were 25 crosses up there. And he looked at one of the samurai warriors and said, where's my cross? Where's my cross? And the warrior was altogether pleased to be able to assemble a cross hastily. And right on that hilltop, they crucified the boy on a smaller cross next to the 25 believers. And Hideyoshi had commanded that they'd be nailed hands and feet, and that they would stay up there until the birds ate every bit of flesh off of their bones. That will show them, he said. That will show them. Where's my cross? Asked the 12-year-old boy. Where's my cross? That is really, if you think about it, the central question of Lent. We want to know, where is this cross we hear about? I mean, Jesus says, whosoever would come after me must take up his cross and follow me. Whosoever would come after me must take up his cross and follow me. In fact, that command is so pronounced that it's issued 5 times in the New Testament. Twice in Matthew, twice in Luke, and once in Mark. Whosoever would come after me must take up his cross and follow me. But still, we want to know, where's our cross? Well, Jesus tells us in a most unpredictable place. In his most famous story, the story we call the parable of the prodigal son. You know the story, but it bears rehearsing again. A prosperous father had 2 sons, an older son who was doggedly faithful, industrious, and loyal to his father and his household. And he had a younger son, a 20-something, who was snot-nosed brat, who was self-absorbed, and who dares to come to his father and say, "Pops, I can't wait any longer for you to keel over and die. Give me my share of the property so I can get on with living." And flabbergasting the family, the household, and the entire village, the father consents to the bratty son's request, and he gives fully half of his property over to the younger son. And the younger son takes half the cattle and half the property, and at bargain basement prices, he liquidates it all. And he does so right in the face of the older son, who's left there to carry on by himself. Well, what happens next is predictable. The younger son takes his ill-earned wealth, and he goes to the Las Vegas of the Middle East, and he spends all his money on drinking and partying and on whores. The scripture is fairly clear about that. And he has a great number of people around him until the money runs out. It's always the case, isn't it? And when the money goes, all his friends disappear, and he's on the precipice of starvation when he realizes, hey, wait a minute. The field hands on my father's estate certainly have enough to eat. I'm going to go see if he'll let me sign on for that job. And so he begins to make his way home. What the younger son cannot imagine is that the father has been looking for him to return since the day he left. Embarrassed, humbled, the father does nothing but wait for his younger son to come home. And then on that day, when the younger son is still a good ways off, the father sees his silhouette against the horizon. He sees someone walking that only walks like his younger son, and he knows that walk. And the father picks up his skirt, and he runs out. He runs out to the younger son. And as the younger son begins to try to give his speech, the father seems not even to hear it. And he takes his most beautiful robe and he wraps it around the son's torn garments and his bruised and dirty body. And he takes the family signet ring and places it on his finger. And he turns to the servants. He said, "Go plan the fiesta of fiestas." And so they do. But at the same time, coming in from the fields is the older son. He's dirty, he's sweaty, he's worn out from toiling in the fields and bearing the brunt of the heat all day. And as he approaches his father's house, he hears accordion music of all things. And he grabs one of the servants. He says, "What in the world's going on at Dad's house?" And the servant says, "Haven't you heard, sir? Your brother's come home. Your younger brother has come home, and your dad has ordered that we'll have a fiesta in celebration of his homecoming." Well, at this, the older son just erupts in anger and embarrassment for his dad and in absolute and complete unbelief. Well, the father knows the older son too. He may know how the younger son walks, but he knows how his son will react. And so he runs out to him too. And he says, "Son, please come into the party." And the older son starts spewing all his anger, all his regret. And the father says, "Just come into the fiesta. I never imagined that my two boys would be under the same roof again. Just come in." But the end of the story, even though the father is pleading, the older son is still standing outside the house. We really don't know what he will do next. He's gotten so crosswise with his father. What both the sons don't realize is that the father's love for them is preemptive. His love goes before their actions or their words. Yeah. I mean, There's no amount of castigation, no amount of sorrow and regret that the younger son can pour out to manipulate the father to forgive him. No. The father's love comes before all that. He races out to the younger son before the younger son can offer any word of repentance. And the younger son has been horrid. And the older son, with all of his anger and all of his embarrassment and all of his self-righteousness, cannot push the father away, because the father's love is preemptive. His love comes before the older son might one day wake up to all of his priggishness and his self-righteousness. His love goes before all that. It's preemptive. In the church, we use a strange word to describe this. It's prevenient. It's prevenient grace. And what I find so often is that we Christians forget the foundation of our faith is enmeshed in this promise of prevenient grace. Grace that precedes any of our repentance. Grace that precedes any of us feeling sorry. Grace that precedes any action or any words we can offer. Now I want you to remember that when Jesus carries his cross through Jerusalem, he does so completely alone. There's no one with him helping him. He carries it only in the company of Roman soldiers. And when they crucify him upon that trash heap called Calvary or Golgotha, there's no one with him except soldiers who are gambling for his garments. It says even the women were far way off. He is alone. He is alone. And yet he goes. Because his love is preemptive. No one was loving him there. He was just loving us. That's prevenient grace. It goes before us. It's not the result of anything we do or say. Prevenient. It's what makes the Christian faith totally countercultural. No one knew this better than St. Paul. No one. Why? Because he's the younger son and the older son on steroids. He's both of them. Think about it. He becomes the hammer. He becomes the instrument for the religious bureaucrats who are intent on destroying human beings. And so they send him out like ISIS. They send him out like ISIS to gather up Christians, not only in Israel, but in surrounding countries, and to bring them back so they can be imprisoned, tortured, and executed. That's Paul. And if you think the younger son's actions are horrid, think about Paul. They are worse than most anything you read in the newspaper. That's Paul. And self-righteous? Oh, I was circumcised on the 8th day. I am a child of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. I was tutored by the greatest rabbi of my day. By the way, in case you don't know it, I am a Roman citizen. Gag me with a spoon. Self-righteous to the nth degree, and yet, as he's on his way outside the country to gather up more Christians like ISIS, the Lord steps in with his preemptive love and gathers Paul in. That's the story. Read Acts 9 if you don't believe me. That's the story. It's preemptive. It is prevenient. Paul had not done one iota to endear himself to the Lord. Nothing. Goose egg. Zero. Because you cannot castigate yourself enough. You cannot manipulate the Lord enough. You cannot do enough things to make him love you. He just does. It comes before us. If not, we would be in control of God. That's the story. That's the cross. And everything we do is in response to that. Do you understand that? Everything we Christians do is in response to the love and the grace we've received, not the other way around. It's all in response. None of us need to be on our high horse. It's all responding to what he's given to us. So we know what the cross is, but where's our cross? Well, I suspect it's right in front of your face as mine is in front of my face. It's in the phone call you haven't made yet. It's in the letter you haven't written yet. It's in the forgiveness you have not extended. And it's in the clemency that you have not allowed yourself to receive. There's nothing fancy about the cross. But we respond. We respond with grace, just as the Lord has extended to us. Oh, but Pat, you know, if I go to so and so and I tell them that I love them, forgive them or something, and they don't say, "Oh, that's great." It's not a matter of what they say or do. It's not a matter of what they say or do at all. It's just a matter of your response and my response. It's right in front of our face. And let me make a corrective here. It's an important corrective. We don't take up our cross. We don't write the letter or make the phone call or seek the person out where we'll be whole, or we will have a brighter life, or a burden will be taken off of us. We don't do it for those reasons. We do it for one reason alone: to glorify God. Did you know that? We only do it to glorify God. In the Gospel of John, it's clear, and I've been teaching it 3 times a week now for weeks. When Jesus talks about his glory, his glorification in John, it's all about being crucified. It's all about him giving his life over preemptively. So, if we're going to glorify God, there's only one avenue to do it. And that is take up our cross. And we'll glorify God, whether or not what we offer is received or not. How powerful is that? How powerful is what I'm talking about? I mean, is there any evidence that it makes any difference whatsoever in the world? Well, let me tell you that Hideyoshi was successful in completely closing off Japan. Not just during his lifetime, but for the next 250 years. He closed off all of Japan for 250 years. Longer than the United States of America has existed. Longer. And yet, at the end of that time, when foreigners were finally allowed to come back to Japan, when they arrived in Nagasaki, they were greeted by Christians. All because 25 adults and one 12-year-old boy had taken up their cross. Let us stand.